The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the soft hiss of the ventilation system and the occasional ping from monitoring equipment. Eris Thorne stood motionless before the observation window, watching as another blood-red sunset painted the barren landscape of Xylar 3. The toxic dust swirled in hypnotic patterns, carried by winds that had once rustled through verdant fields, back when this dying world still had something resembling life. 16 months into his solitary posting, and the silence still bothered him. Perhaps that's why he'd taken to talking to himself, or rather, to the holographic images of his wife Alara and daughter Mira that he kept by his bunk. The two faces that haunted his dreams and fueled his self-imposed exile on this desolate world. Atmospheric toxicity increased another 2% today, he murmured into his datapad. At this rate, complete ecological collapse will occur approximately 3 months ahead of Xenocorp's projections. The corporation's directives were clear: observe and document the final stages of planetary death. Do not interfere with the natural progression of collapse. Maintain the observation post until termination of all indigenous life is confirmed, after which resource extraction teams would move in. The Xylarians, the planet's native species, were presumed extinct or on the verge of extinction in remote regions. Victims of their world's slow death after it had been stripped of resources by another alien race centuries earlier. The strict non-interference protocols suited Eris just fine. Rules gave structure. Structure kept the memories at bay. Memories of screaming metal and the void of space claiming the transport ship carrying Alara and Mira while he watched helplessly from another vessel. 5 years had passed, yet the wound remained fresh, a daily torment that had driven him to this forsaken place where emotional detachment was not just encouraged but required. A flashing red light on his console pulled him from his reverie. Perimeter sensor activated, northwestern quadrant, announced the AI system. Unregistered biological entity detected. Eris frowned. The scanner must be malfunctioning. Nothing larger than microbial colonies had been detected in this region for months. He switched on the external camera feed, expecting to find some wind-blown debris triggering the sensors. What he saw instead sent a jolt through his body. A tall, gaunt figure swayed at the edge of the compound's force field. It wore tattered garments fashioned from unfamiliar organic material, the color of burnt amber. A Xylarian. Female, based on the physical characteristics documented in the xenobiology database. She clutched something to her chest, something small and apparently alive. Eris zoomed in the camera. The Xylarian woman's face was haggard, cheekbones jutting beneath translucent skin. But her eyes, large, amber-flecked orbs, burned with desperate determination. In her arms lay an infant, eyes closed, its chest barely moving with shallow breaths. The woman reached the gate and collapsed to her knees. From some hidden pocket, she produced a crude translation device, likely salvaged from an abandoned research station. Her voice, raspy and broken, came through the compound's external speakers. "My milk has dried up, human. My baby hasn't eaten for days." The words struck Eris like physical blows. His hands hovered over the console, paralyzed by conflicting impulses. Xenocorp's directives were absolute. Non-interference was the cornerstone of their operation on Xylar 3. Helping would mean violation of contract, termination, possibly even criminal charges for interfering with a protected extinction event. Yet as he stared at the infant in the woman's arms, he saw only Mira, tiny, helpless Mira, who had relied on him for protection. Mira, whom he had failed. The Xylarian woman pressed her forehead to the dust, still clutching her child. "Please," the translator crackled. "I beg you." Eris closed his eyes, his breath coming in short gasps. 5 years of emotional suppression crumbled under the weight of this moment. When he opened his eyes again, his hand was already moving toward the security override. "Security protocols suspended," reported the AI. "Warning, this action violates Xenocorp Directive 1173. Do you wish to proceed?" "Yes," Eris whispered, his voice cracking. "I do." The gate slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The Xylarian woman raised her head, amber eyes wide with disbelief and the first flicker of hope. As Eris rushed to help her inside before the toxic air could further damage her or her child, he knew there would be no turning back from this decision. And strangely, for the first time in 5 years, the crushing weight of guilt seemed to lift just a little. Eris guided the Xylarian woman through the airlock, supporting her trembling frame as the decontamination sequence ran. She clutched her infant protectively, flinching when the sterilization lights flashed. "It's okay," Eris said, trying to sound reassuring. "It's just removing the toxic particles." He wasn't sure if her crude translator could process his words accurately, but his gentle tone seemed to calm her. Once inside the main laboratory, the woman sank onto a medical examination chair, her large eyes darting around the sterile environment. The infant in her arms made a feeble sound, somewhere between a whimper and a sigh. "I need to examine your child," Eris said slowly, pointing to the medical scanner. "To help." The woman hesitated, then nodded once. Carefully, almost reverently, she laid the infant on the examination platform. Under the bright lights, Eris could see the full extent of the child's condition. Its skin, naturally a pale amber hue according to the database, had a grayish tint. The rib cage was visible through translucent skin, and its limbs seemed painfully thin. Eris activated the scanner, holding his breath as the results populated his screen. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, elevated toxin levels from the planet's atmosphere. But the child was resilient. Its vital organs were still functioning, if barely. "Your baby is very sick," he said, meeting the mother's anxious gaze. "But I think I can help. What's your name?" The woman touched her chest. "Lyra," she said, the translator rendering her voice with a metallic echo. Then she gestured to the infant. "Kale." "Lyra," Eris repeated, the alien name feeling strange on his tongue. "I'm Eris Thorn." He moved to the synthesizer unit, mentally reviewing what little the database contained about Xylarian physiology. Their digestive systems were adapted to process the native flora of Xylar 3, flora that had all but disappeared. Creating something nutritionally compatible would be challenging. "I need to make food for Kale," he explained, gesturing at the synthesizer. "But I don't know exactly what Xylarian infants eat." Lyra's translator crackled with static before producing a fragmented response. "Mothers. Milk. Then, sweet root. Crushed with water of life." Eris frowned. "Sweet root? Water of life?" The botanicals database might have records of native plants, but without samples, a thought struck him. He hurried to the storage unit where biological samples were kept, specimens collected during the initial survey of the planet before the observation-only protocols were implemented. Among them were preserved plant materials, including roots from various extinct or endangered species. "Could you recognize this sweet root if you saw it?" he asked, pulling up images on a display screen. Lyra approached hesitantly, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the botanical catalog. She stopped at an image of a gnarled, purple-tinged root with a bioluminescent core. "This," she said, touching the screen. "Sweet root." The sample cabinet contained a small preserved specimen of the exact plant. Using the synthesizer's analysis function, Eris began breaking down its chemical composition, trying to recreate a digestible substitute. The water of life proved to be a mineral-rich fluid once found in underground springs, relatively simple to replicate with the compounds in his lab. Hours passed. Lyra sat beside Kale, humming a low, melodic tune that seemed to soothe the infant. Eris worked frantically, testing and adjusting formulations, discarding failed attempts. It was well past midnight when he finally produced a milky solution that matched the nutritional profile he'd calculated. "I think this might work," he said, presenting the small bottle to Lyra. "But I can't be certain." Lyra took the bottle, studying the liquid inside. With trembling hands, she lifted Kale and brought the bottle to his mouth. The infant made no move to feed at first, but after Lyra stroked his cheek in what must have been a familiar gesture, Kale began to suckle weakly. Both Eris and Lyra held their breath, watching for any adverse reaction. When Kale continued to drink without distress, Lyra's shoulders sagged with relief. Her large eyes filled with glistening tears that tracked down her dusty cheeks. "Thank you," she said simply, the emotion transcending the mechanical monotone of the translator. Eris nodded, suddenly acutely aware of what he had done. He had broken the cardinal rule of his assignment. He had interfered, and somehow, for the first time since the accident, he felt something other than grief and guilt. He felt purpose. As Kale finished feeding and drifted into sleep, Eris prepared a makeshift bed in the research station's small medical bay. He showed Lyra to the adjacent guest quarters, designed for the inspection teams that occasionally visited. "Rest," he told her. "We'll talk more tomorrow." That night, Eris lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The image of Kale taking the bottle replayed in his mind, merging with memories of feeding Mira as an infant. The familiar pain surfaced, but alongside it was something new, a tentative connection to the present, to life, to possibility. The station's AI chimed softly, interrupting his thoughts. Incoming transmission from Xenocor Control. Priority level, urgent. Eris closed his eyes. Reality crashed back. They knew. Of course they knew. The station's automated systems would have reported the security override. Now he would face the consequences of his choice. But as he considered the sleeping forms of Lyra and Kale just rooms away, Eris realized that, for once, the thought of breaking rules didn't fill him with dread. Instead, a strange calm settled over him. Tomorrow would bring trouble, certainly. But tonight, a child who might have died was sleeping peacefully. Whatever came next, he couldn't bring himself to regret that. The urgent transmission from Xenocorp remained unanswered that night. Eris couldn't face it yet. Not until he'd had more time with Lyra and Kale, more time to formulate a plan, more time to remember what it felt like to act according to conscience rather than protocol. Morning came with the dim, reddish light of Xyler's aging sun filtering through the observation windows. Eris found Lyra already awake, sitting beside Kale's makeshift crib, watching the infant's chest rise and fall with stronger breaths than the day before. "He's better," Lyra said as Eris entered. The translation device seemed to be functioning more smoothly after Eris had spent an hour recalibrating it during his sleepless night. But still weak. Eris nodded, running a medical scanner over Kale's tiny form. "The formula is helping, but he needs more time to recover. His system has been severely stressed." He prepared another bottle of the synthetic formula, adding trace minerals that his analysis suggested might improve absorption. As Lyra fed Kale, Eris brought her a nutrient pack designed for human consumption, but modified based on what he now understood of Xylarian digestive capabilities. Lyra took it gratefully, but her amber eyes remained watchful, cautious. She was still evaluating him, determining whether this human could truly be trusted. "You said last night we would talk," she said after finishing her meal. "I must know. Why did you help us? Your kind has only watched as mine died." The question hit Eris like a physical blow. He sat down heavily in a chair across from her. I lost my family," he finally said. "My wife, my daughter. They died. I couldn't save them." His voice broke on the last words, the admission painful even after 5 years. "When I saw you and Kale, I couldn't just watch. Not again." Lyra's expression softened. She placed a four-fingered hand gently on his arm, the first voluntary contact she had initiated. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. "Among my people, we believe that souls who have known great suffering are given the chance to heal by helping others." Eris managed a sad smile. "I don't know about souls, but I do know I violated direct orders by bringing you inside. My employers will not be pleased. These employers, they wish for my people to die." Eris hesitated, then decided Lyra deserved honesty. Xenocorp doesn't actively wish for Xylarians to die. They simply don't wish to interfere with what they consider the natural end of your species. After which, they plan to extract remaining resources from your world. Lyra's face hardened. "There is nothing natural about our end. Our world was healthy once, before the Krexer came with their machines. They took what they wanted and left us poison." She glanced at Kale. "We did not think any humans would be different. Most probably aren't. Eris admitted. But I'm not here to defend my species or Xenocorp. I'm trying to do what's right. Now, the conversation was interrupted by the station AI's insistent alert. Reminder, unanswered transmission from Xenocorp Control. Priority level has been escalated to critical. Eris sighed. I can't avoid them forever. I need to answer, but first. He looked at Lyra intently. I need to know more about your situation. Where did you come from? Are there others? Lyra's expression grew distant, pained. My tribe lived in the northern valleys, where the underground springs kept some plants alive. But 6 cycles ago, the water began to taste wrong. Many became sick. Some left to search for new water, never returning. Others simply gave up. Her voice caught. My mate died shortly after Kale was born. The poison in the water, I think. I was determined that our son would live, even when my milk began to dry up. She touched the crude translator around her neck. This was left by humans long ago. I learned some of your words from it. When all others were gone, I remembered stories of a human dwelling in the western plains. I walked for 12 days, carrying Kale, following the old trail markers. I did not expect help, but I had no choice. Eris felt a weight pressing on his chest as he listened. The implications were clear, Lyra. And Kale might well be the last of their kind. The gravity of that realization only strengthened his resolve. I'll answer Xenocorp, he said, standing. I won't tell them about you. Not yet. I need time to figure this out. He moved to the communications terminal and composed a carefully worded response to Xenocorp, attributing the security override to a malfunction during the dust storm and promising a full diagnostic report. It wouldn't fool them for long, but might buy precious time. As days passed, Kale grew stronger. The synthetic formula was clearly working, and the infant had begun showing signs of normal development. More alert periods, stronger cries, even the occasional sound that Lyra identified as Xylarian laughter. Eris found himself captivated by these small victories, often spending hours simply watching Kale, remembering the joy of seeing his own daughter reach similar milestones. Lyra, too, regained strength. She began helping Eris analyze the botanical samples in his laboratory, identifying plants with medicinal properties and explaining traditional Xylarian healing practices. Her knowledge was impressive, and Eris recorded everything meticulously, partly for scientific value, but mostly because he recognized that he might be documenting the last repository of an entire civilization's wisdom. Through their daily interactions, communication improved. Lyra learned more English words, supplementing the translator, and Eris picked up phrases in the musical Xylarian language. They developed a rhythm of coexistence, working together to care for Kale and maintaining the station. But the borrowed time was running out. Xenocorp's communications grew increasingly suspicious and demanding. Eris's vague responses about equipment malfunctions were meeting with threats of an inspection team. The facade would soon collapse. On the 12th night after Lyra's arrival, as they sat together watching Kale sleep peacefully, Eris finally voiced the question that had been growing in his mind. If there was a place, somewhere safe, with clean water and plants that could sustain you, would you want to find it? Lyra looked at him sharply. Such a place still exists on Xylar? Eris shrugged. I don't know, but your people survived for centuries after the Krexer left. There must have been refuges, places where the contamination was less severe. Places not on Xenocorp's surveys. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into a hidden pocket in her tattered garments and withdrew a small, intricately carved item, something between a stone tablet and a mechanical device. This is the Wayfinder, she said reverently. Passed through my lineage for generations. It contains maps to the ancestral refuge, a network of caves beneath the Crimson Peaks. Our elders spoke of underground rivers and luminous plants that grow without sunlight. Most believed it was merely legend. She ran her fingers over the ancient inscriptions. My grandmother was keeper of ways. She believed the refuge was real. Before she died, she entrusted this to me, saying I would know when to seek it. Eris studied the object with fascination. The markings resembled no Xylarian script he'd seen in the database, but there were clear astronomical references that might be used for navigation. Do you think you could interpret these maps? He asked. Find the way to this refuge. Lyra nodded slowly. I was trained in the old knowledge. But the journey would be perilous, across the dust plains and through the howling canyons. Many have died attempting it. More perilous than staying here. Eris countered. Xenocorp will send an inspection team soon. When they find you, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lyra cradled the Wayfinder. If we went, would you come with us? We would not survive alone. Kale needs the formula you create. I need. She faltered, then met his eyes directly. I have come to trust you, Eris Thorn. My son smiles at you. These are not small things. The question struck Eris deeply. Leave everything behind. His career, his identity, the last tenuous connections to his old life, to venture into the wasteland with an alien woman and her child, seeking a refuge that might be merely legend? Yet when he considered the alternative, returning to his solitary existence, knowing he had sent Lyra and Kale to certain death, there was no real choice at all. Yes, he said simply. I'll come. That night, a massive dust storm hit the research station, more powerful than any Eris had recorded. Alarms blared as wind-driven particles overwhelmed the filtration systems. Power fluctuated, and for several hours, the external communication array went completely offline. Eris saw it as the opportunity they needed. Working frantically through the night, he downloaded all medical and botanical data that might prove useful, along with geographical surveys of the regions surrounding the Crimson Peaks. He gathered survival equipment, water purifiers, portable energy cells, and as much raw material for Kale's formula as the synthesizer could produce. While the storm still raged, interfering with monitoring systems, Eris accessed the secure database one last time. What he found confirmed his worst fears and solidified his resolve. Buried in classified files was evidence that Xenocorp had detected scattered Xylarian life signs years earlier, but it classified the information as non-actionable. The company had deliberately maintained the fiction of extinction to justify their resource extraction plans. A note from the board of directors made the position clear. Observation of natural extinction process to continue. Intervention would create undesirable ethical complications regarding resource rights. Eris downloaded the damning files to a secure chip, then systematically corrupted the station's backup systems. Let Xenocorp wonder what had happened here. Let them search for answers they would never find. As the storm began to abate, Eris, Lyra, and Kale slipped away from the research station, heading eastward into the vast expanse of Crimson Desert. They moved under cover of lingering dust clouds, Kale secured in an improvised carrier against Lyra's chest, both protected by modified atmospheric filters. Eris carried the bulk of their supplies in a gravity-assisted pack, along with a basic navigation system calibrated to astronomical markers identified on the Wayfinder. The journey through the dust plains was even more arduous than they had anticipated. By day, the ancient sun beat down mercilessly, its radiation barely filtered by Xylar's thinning atmosphere. By night, temperatures plummeted, forcing them to huddle together in thermal shelters, conserving body heat. Kale suffered despite their best efforts. The atmospheric filters couldn't completely protect him from the toxic particles, and their water supply, though carefully rationed, dwindled faster than planned. Eris constantly adjusted the formula composition to compensate for Kale's changing condition, but the infant's hard-won strength began to fade. On the fourth day, they encountered the first of many trials, a narrow ravine that, according to Lyra's interpretation of the Wayfinder, must be crossed to reach the foothills of the Crimson Peaks. As they picked their way across treacherous terrain, Eris slipped on loose shale, tumbling several meters down a steep incline. Though he avoided serious injury, the fall damaged one of the water purifiers and cracked the casing of a medical scanner. That night, as they camped in the dubious shelter of an overhanging rock formation, Lyra gently tended to Eris's scrapes and bruises, applying a salve made from one of the medicinal plants they had brought. "Why did you really come with us, Eris Thorn?" she asked quietly, her amber eyes reflecting the dim glow of their emergency light. "You had safety, position, yet you walk into death with strangers. Eris winced as the salve stung his abraded skin. They're not safe, those things you mentioned. They're hollow. After Alara and Mira died, I was just existing, following rules, being a good employee. He gave a bitter laugh, as if any of that matters. His gaze drifted to Kale, sleeping fitfully nearby. When I saw you both at the gate that day, it was like waking up, like being given a second chance. Lyra's hand paused in its ministrations. To save your family, through saving mine? Maybe at first, Eris admitted. But now I just want you and Kale to have a chance. To live, to thrive if possible. He met her eyes. Is that enough? Lyra's expression softened. It is more than enough. Her hand moved from his injury to rest lightly on his face, an intimate gesture that bridged the vast differences between their species. My people have a saying, those who walk together through dust become kin beyond blood. The moment hung between them, fragile and profound. Then Kale stirred with a weak cry, and the spell broke as Lyra moved to tend to her son. Eris watched them, feeling something unfamiliar expand in his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The next 3 days brought them through the howling canyons, a maze-like formation where wind currents created eerie, mournful sounds as they swept through the stone corridors. Here, Lyra's knowledge proved invaluable. She recognized subtle markers carved into the canyon walls centuries earlier, spiral patterns and angular glyphs that guided their path through the labyrinth. Their 6th night in the wasteland was the darkest. Kale developed a rattling cough, his tiny body burning with fever. Their medical supplies were depleted, and Eris felt the crushing weight of helplessness as history seemed poised to repeat itself. Another child he could not save. Through the night, they took turns holding Kale, bathing his forehead with precious drops of purified water, whispering encouragements in 2 languages. Lyra sang soft Xylarian lullabies while Eris monitored Kale's vital signs with a damaged scanner, making desperate calculations to adjust the remaining formula to combat the fever. As dawn broke, another blood-red sunrise on the dying world, Kale's fever finally broke. The infant opened his eyes, focusing with unexpected clarity on Eris's face. Then, astonishingly, he reached up with a tiny 4-fingered hand and grasped Eris's thumb. Eris felt tears spill down his dust-streaked face. Beside him, Lyra watched with her own eyes glistening. He fights, she whispered, like his father, like you. They reached the foothills of the Crimson Peaks on the 8th day. Here, the landscape gradually changed. The ubiquitous red dust gave way to rocky terrain streaked with darker minerals. Occasionally, they spotted hardy lichens clinging to sheltered rock faces, the first sign of persistent life they had encountered since leaving the station. Lyra grew increasingly animated as they ascended the winding path through the foothills. The markings match the Wayfinder, she exclaimed, pointing to weathered symbols carved into strategically placed boulders. We are on the true path. Their spirits lifted, but physical reality remained harsh. Their supplies were critically low. Eris had begun skipping meals to ensure Lyra maintained strength to care for Kale. The atmospheric filters were nearing the end of their operational life. Time was running out. On the 10th day, as they climbed a particularly steep ridge, Lyra suddenly froze, gripping Eris's arm. There, she whispered, pointing to a sheer rock face ahead. The Guardian Stone. Eris squinted against the glare. At first, he saw nothing unusual about the cliff wall. Then, as clouds shifted and the light changed, a pattern emerged. A massive carving weathered by centuries of dust storms, but still recognizable as a stylized rendering of intertwining vines surrounding a circular portal. Lyra approached reverently, Kale secure in his carrier. She placed her hand on the carving, tracing the ancient lines with trembling fingers. Then she withdrew the Wayfinder and aligned it with specific elements of the carving. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then a faint vibration rumbled through the stone. A seam appeared in what had seemed solid rock, widening into a narrow passage just large enough for them to enter single file. Lyra turned to Eris, her eyes wide with wonder and vindication. "The ancestral refuge," she breathed. "It is real." The passage led them into darkness, illuminated only by the emergency light Eris carried. They moved cautiously, the air growing noticeably cooler and, remarkably, cleaner with each step. The tunnel sloped downward, occasionally branching, but each time Lyra consulted the wayfinder and chose their path with growing confidence. After nearly an hour of careful descent, the tunnel widened into a vast cavern. And there, in the darkness, they beheld a miracle. The ceiling of the cavern was dotted with thousands of bioluminescent organisms, casting a soft, blue-green light over the underground realm. Below, crystal-clear pools collected water that dripped from stalactites, forming small streams that disappeared into further chambers. Most astonishing of all, patches of vegetation grew in clusters around the water sources, delicate, pale plants that seemed to absorb the bioluminescent light. "The stories were true," Lyra whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She knelt beside one of the pools, testing the water with a trembling hand. "Clean. Pure." Eris activated the last functional scanner, confirming what seemed impossible. The water was untainted by the toxins that poison the surface. The plants, though alien to him, registered as non-toxic and potentially nutritious. The air quality was better than anything he had recorded since arriving on Xylar 3. They had found sanctuary. In the days that followed, they established a simple camp near one of the larger pools, using the remaining supplies from the station to create a comfortable living space. Eris set up the portable energy cells to power essential equipment and rig collection systems to gather the pure water. Lyra, with her knowledge of native plants, identified several species growing in the cave that could supplement their diet, including, miraculously, a variant of the sweet root needed for Kale's nutrition. The infant responded dramatically to the improved conditions. His breathing cleared, his appetite increased, and his periods of alertness lengthened. Most precious of all, his laughter, a lilting, musical sound unlike any human infant's, began to echo through the cavern chambers with increasing frequency. As their immediate survival concerns eased, Eris and Lyra began exploring the broader cave system. They discovered multiple connected caverns, some with larger colonies of plants and even small creatures, phosphorescent insects and tiny, blind amphibians that had adapted to the underground environment. Ancient Xylarian artifacts were carefully preserved in niches carved into the rock walls. Tools, ceremonial objects, and most importantly, records inscribed on crystal tablets. Lyra spent hours poring over these tablets, translating the ancient script for Eris. They told the history of Xylar 3, how it had once been a verdant world before the Krexer exploitation, how the surviving Xylarians had established these refuges as their surface home slowly died, and how they had preserved seeds and specimens of native life forms in the hope that one day their world might be reborn. Most intriguing were references to a seed of awakening, a repository of biological material supposedly hidden in the deepest chamber of the refuge, designed to regenerate the planet's ecosystem when conditions permitted. Whether this was literal or metaphorical remained unclear, but it kindled something profound in both Eris and Lyra, a shared vision beyond mere survival. Their relationship evolved in the peaceful sanctuary of the caves. Initial gratitude and dependency transformed into genuine partnership and deeper emotional bonds. They developed rituals and routines, sharing meals, teaching each other languages and skills, taking turns caring for Kale, who increasingly regarded both adults as parental figures. One evening, as they sat beside a luminous pool watching Kale play with a simple toy Eris had crafted from cave materials, Lyra leaned against Eris's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural between them. "I've been studying the Guardian texts," she said softly. "There are passages about renewal, not just survival, but healing. The Ancient Ones believed Xylar could be restored." Eris nodded thoughtfully. His scientific mind had been considering similar possibilities. The toxins on the surface aren't permanent. Given enough time and the right biological agents, they could be neutralized. The soil could support life again. A generation's work? Perhaps more, Lyra mused. A purpose worth having, Eris replied. He glanced at Kale, now dozing peacefully on a bed of soft plant fibers. For him, for whatever future children might come. Lyra's eyes widened slightly at the implication. Then she smiled, a full, radiant expression that transformed her alien features into something Eris found beautiful beyond words. Yes, she said simply, for all our children. They both knew challenges remained. Xenocorp would eventually discover the abandoned research station. They might send search parties, or worse, accelerate their resource extraction plans. The refuge, while secure for now, had limited space and resources. The work of planetary healing, if even possible, would require technologies they didn't yet possess and knowledge they were only beginning to uncover. Yet as they sat together in the gentle glow of the bioluminescent ceiling, these concerns seemed distant compared to what they had already overcome. They had crossed a toxic wasteland. They had saved a child who represented the future of an entire species. They had found each other across an unfathomable gulf of difference. In the quiet of the cave, with Kale sleeping peacefully nearby, Eris thought of Alara and Mira. For the first time, the memory brought not just pain, but a sense of connection, as if they too were part of this unlikely journey toward healing and renewal. He liked to think they would approve of the path he had chosen, the family he had found. 1 month after their arrival at the refuge, Eris and Lyra ventured into a previously unexplored chamber, following clues from the crystal tablets regarding the location of the Seed of Awakening. What they found exceeded their wildest hopes. A sophisticated biorepository constructed by ancient Xylarians, containing thousands of sealed specimens, seeds, spores, embryonic material from native fauna, all preserved in a state of suspended animation. The technology was beyond Eris's immediate understanding, but the implications were clear. Here lay the potential rebirth of a world. Not just survival for 3 refugees, but the possibility of restoring an entire ecosystem. It would take years, perhaps decades of study and careful work, but the means existed. That night, they stood at the entrance to the refuge, looking out at the toxic landscape illuminated by starlight. Kale, now actively crawling and babbling a mixture of Xylarian sounds and human words, was secured in a sling across Lyra's chest. It won't be easy, Eris said, his arm around Lyra's slender waist. Xenocorp will never give up looking for resources here, and restoring even a small portion of the ecosystem will take more than our lifetimes. Lyra leaned into his embrace, her amber eyes reflecting the distant stars. My people have a saying, we do not plant trees for ourselves, but for those who come after us. She looked down at Kale, who was reaching out with curious fingers toward the night sky. He will continue what we begin, and those who come after him. Those who come after, Eris echoed, the concept filling him with quiet determination. In his mind's eye, he saw not just Kale grown to adulthood, but other children, perhaps even children born of the unlikely union that had formed between himself and Lyra. Xenobiologists had always maintained that humans and Xylarians were genetically incompatible for reproduction, but in this place of ancient mysteries and renewal, who could say what might be possible? They sealed the entrance behind them, returning to the luminous safety of their underground home. As they walked, Eris found himself thinking of the research station he had abandoned. The sterile rooms, the rigid protocols, the endless documentation of death. He had traded that existence for this uncertain future of struggle and hope. The scientist in him still found it hard to believe he had made such an irrational choice. Yet watching Lyra sing softly to Kale as they made their way through the glowing caverns, Eris knew he would make the same decision 1,000 times over. The next morning brought a new project. Using materials salvaged from their supplies and native resources from the cave, Eris and Lyra began constructing a rudimentary laboratory near the biorepository. Their goal was ambitious, to understand the ancient Xylarian preservation technology and develop methods to gradually reintroduce the stored biological materials to the surface. We'll start small, Eris explained as he calibrated a modified scanner to analyze the sealed specimens. Test plots in protected areas near the cave entrance. Plants that can process the toxins in the soil. Once those take hold, we could try more complex organisms. Lyra nodded, carefully transcribing symbols from the crystal tablets into a record system they had devised together. The ancient texts speak of a sequence. First the purifiers, then the builders, then the sustainers. It matches what you describe. She smiled at him. Your science and my people's wisdom are not so different. As they worked side by side, Kale played at their feet with makeshift toys, small luminous stones, and carved wooden figurines that Lyra had crafted during quiet evenings. The infant's health continued to improve in the clean environment of the refuge. His movements were stronger, his vocalizations more complex. Though still small for his age, he showed remarkable resilience and curiosity, traits inherited from both his biological parents and now nurtured by his adoptive father as well. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. They established a rhythm of life in their underground sanctuary. Mornings spent working on the restoration project, afternoons exploring the cave system or tending the small garden of edible plants they had established near their living space. Evenings dedicated to recording their findings and telling stories to Kale, who absorbed both languages with the effortless facility of the very young. On rare occasions, they ventured briefly to the surface, heavily protected and always alert for signs of Xenocorp activity. During one such expedition, nearly 6 months after finding the refuge, they discovered the first evidence that their work might succeed, a patch of soil near the cave entrance where they had introduced modified microorganisms was showing decreased toxicity levels. Small, hardy shoots of a native grass variant had begun to emerge. Lyra dropped to her knees beside the fragile green strands, tears streaming down her face. Life, she whispered, touching the delicate blades with reverent fingers. Returning. Eris knelt beside her, his own vision blurring. In that moment, the magnitude of what they had undertaken and what they might actually achieve struck him with full force. They were not merely surviving. They were participating in the rebirth of a world. That night, as Kale slept peacefully in his bed fashioned from cave flora, Eris and Lyra stood before the ancient wall carvings that depicted Xyler's history, its past glory, its devastation, and the prophesied renewal. In the soft, bioluminescent light, Lyra traced the flowing symbols with practiced fingers. These last glyphs, she said softly, tell of the rejoining, when the children of Xyler would return from below to reclaim the surface. For generations, my people believed this was mere legend, a comfort story told to ease the pain of our dying world. She turned to Eris, her amber eyes luminous with emotion. But it is happening, Eris. We are making the legend real. Eris took her hand, marveling as always at how natural it felt despite the anatomical differences, her 4 slender digits interlacing with his 5. Science and legend, finding common ground, he said with a smile. Much like us. Lyra moved closer, resting her head against his chest in a gesture that had become precious to both of them. The Wayfinder brought me to your door, Eris Thorn, across a toxic wasteland, against all probability. Perhaps that, too, was part of the prophecy. Or simply extremely good luck, Eris suggested, his voice light but his heart full. There is no word for luck in Old Xylerian, Lyra replied. Only destiny and choice. Sometimes they're the same word. Later that night, as Lyra slept, Eris sat at the small workstation they had assembled, reviewing data from their latest experiments. The results were promising. Several strains of the modified microbes were thriving in the toxic soil, gradually breaking down the most harmful compounds. But the process was painfully slow. At current rates, it would take decades to detoxify even the immediate area around the refuge. Decades they might not have. Eris had no illusions about Xenocorp. They would have investigated the abandoned research station by now. Whether they believed him dead or deserter, they would eventually expand their resource surveys to this region. When they did, the refuge might be discovered. He and Lyra had discussed contingency plans, deeper chambers that could be sealed emergency supplies, alternative exits from the cave system. But such measures would only delay the inevitable if Xenocorp deployed their full technological capabilities. What they needed was a more permanent solution, a way to make at least part of Xyler so visibly revitalized that even the corporation would hesitate to destroy it. A soft sound drew his attention. Kale was awake, standing unsteadily beside his bed, watching Eris with solemn eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond his months. "Hey there, little one," Eris said softly, moving to lift the child. "Can't sleep?" Kale babbled something in his mixed language, patting Eris's face with small hands. The gesture was so filled with trust and affection that Eris felt his throat tighten. This child, this miraculous, resilient child, was counting on him. "I won't let you down," he whispered, holding Kale close. "Any of you." As if in answer, Kale pointed toward the workstation, to the screen displaying molecular structures of the toxic compounds and the microbes designed to neutralize them. "You want to see the science, huh?" Eris chuckled, carrying Kale back to the desk. "Starting your education early. Good thinking." He sat with Kale on his lap, explaining the complex data in simple terms, knowing the infant couldn't possibly understand, but finding comfort in the routine. Kale watched the screen with apparent fascination, occasionally reaching toward particular images. During one such moment, Kale's small finger landed on a molecular diagram Eris had been struggling with for weeks, a particularly resistant toxin that required a specific enzyme to break down, an enzyme none of their modified microbes could produce in sufficient quantities. "Yes, that's the troublemaker," Eris confirmed, zooming in on the structure. "If we could just—" He stopped abruptly, staring at the reconfigured display. From this new perspective, with certain elements highlighted by the random touch of Kale's finger, Eris suddenly saw a pattern he had missed before. The molecular structure resembled, in certain key aspects, compounds found in one of the luminous fungi growing deep in the cave system. Fungi they had largely ignored as merely decorative. "That's it," he breathed, excitement surging through him. "Kale, you little genius." The infant gurgled happily at Eris's obvious excitement, though clearly not understanding its cause. Eris worked through the night, modeling potential combinations and interactions. By morning, when Lyra woke, he had a new direction for their research, one that might accelerate the detoxification process exponentially if his calculations were correct. "The universe works in strange ways," Lyra observed when he explained his breakthrough and how it had come about. "Through the hand of child." The following weeks were filled with intensive work, harvesting the luminous fungi, extracting the key compounds, and introducing them to their microbe cultures. The results exceeded even Eris's optimistic projections. The enhanced microbes multiplied rapidly and attacked the toxic compounds with unprecedented efficiency. Their first major field test came 3 months later, a carefully prepared plot of land near the cave entrance, approximately 100 square meters. They introduced the enhanced microbe solution and monitored the results daily. Within 2 weeks, soil toxicity had decreased by 60%. Within a month, the first native plants were taking root without assistance. Standing at the edge of the plot, watching green life reclaim red dust, Eris felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything in his previous scientific career. This wasn't abstract research or passive observation. This was healing. Lyra, holding Kale, who was now walking with assistance and babbling increasingly coherent phrases in both languages, gazed at the growing patch of green with tears in her eyes. "My son will walk on living ground," she said softly, "not just in hidden caves, but under open sky." The work accelerated from that point. They expanded their test plots, refined their techniques, and documented everything meticulously. Kale's first birthday, as best they could calculate, was celebrated beside a thriving garden of native Xylarian plants growing under the open sky in detoxified soil. They shared a meal that included, for the first time, fresh fruits harvested from their own efforts rather than synthesized or preserved food. As another year passed, their success grew more visible. A full hectare surrounding the refuge entrance had been detoxified and replanted. Small native insects had been reintroduced and were thriving. The air quality in the immediate vicinity had improved noticeably. Most importantly, their process had become self-sustaining. The initial microbe introduction led to a cascade of natural biological responses that continued the healing without constant intervention. Kale, now just past his second birthday, was thriving as well. He spoke both languages with increasing fluency, ran through the underground chambers with boundless energy, and showed a precocious interest in both the scientific equipment and the ancient Xylarian artifacts. He referred to Eris as father in the human tongue and used the Xylarian equivalent for Lyra, a familial structure that seemed entirely natural to all three of them. One evening, as they sat together at the entrance to the refuge watching the sunset paint the newly green landscape, Eris voiced the thought that had been growing in his mind. We should expand further, not just the immediate area, but establish multiple restoration sites across the region. Create a network of recovery zones that could eventually merge. Lyra nodded thoughtfully, watching Kale playing with a small native rodent they had recently reintroduced. It would require more resources, more equipment than what we salvaged from your station. Yes, Eris agreed, which means I might need to make contact with the outside again. Not Xenocorp, he added quickly, seeing her alarm. There are independent research collectives, environmental groups that operate beyond corporate control. If I could reach them, show them what we've achieved here. Lyra was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Such contact would expose our existence. Expose Kale. Eventually, yes, Eris acknowledged. But it might also provide protection. If enough people know about this place, about what's happening here, it becomes harder for Xenocorp to simply erase it. He took her hand. I understand your fear. 4 generations. Outsiders have only brought destruction to your world. But there are humans who would stand with us, fight for what we're doing here. You truly believe this? Lyra asked, studying his face intently. I do, Eris said with conviction. Not everyone is Xenocorp. Not everyone sees worlds as merely resources to be extracted. Lyra's gaze returned to Kale, who was now examining a small flowering plant with intense concentration. He deserves more than a hidden life, she said finally. He deserves a future where he can walk freely under the sky of his ancestors. If reaching out can help secure that future. She squeezed Eris's hand. Then we must try. The decision made, they began preparations. Using components salvaged from their original equipment, Eris constructed a long-range communication device capable of bypassing Xenocorp's monitoring systems. He encoded a carefully crafted message, documenting their work, the restoration process, and the evidence of Xylarian survival, and sent it to several trusted contacts from his pre-Xenocorp academic career. Weeks passed with no response. Eris began to fear the transmission had failed or been intercepted. Then, one day, as they were working in their largest restoration plot, the communication device activated with an incoming signal. The message was brief but clear. Coordinates received. Independent research vessel Horizon departing from Proxima Station. Estimated arrival, 30 standard days. Maintain current position. Hope, hope. The word resonated through their small family as they prepared for first contact with the outside world after nearly 3 years of isolation. They expanded their restoration efforts with renewed vigor, eager to show the arriving researchers what was possible. Kale, picking up on his parents' excitement without fully understanding its cause, threw himself into helping with characteristic enthusiasm. 28 days after receiving the message, their sensors detected an approaching craft entering Xylar's atmosphere, smaller than a standard Xenocorp vessel, following the exact approach vector they had suggested to minimize detection. Eris, Lyra, and Kale stood together at the edge of their largest restoration zone, now spanning nearly 5 hectares of thriving Xylarian ecosystem, watching. As the craft made its final descent, Lyra held Kale's hand tightly, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. Eris stood beside them, one arm protectively around Lyra's shoulders, the other holding a data tablet containing all their research. The ship landed gracefully at the designated coordinates. After a brief pause, the entry hatch opened and 3 figures emerged, wearing lightweight environmental suits as a precaution. Those sensors would have told them the immediate area was safe. The leader of the group removed her helmet as she approached, revealing a woman with silver-streaked dark hair and keen eyes that widened as she took in the improbable scene before her. The flourishing plants, the small native animals, and most startlingly, the interspecies family waiting to greet her. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice reflecting disbelief and growing excitement. "When we received your transmission, many thought it was a hoax. But this—" She gestured at the green landscape rising from the red desert. "This is beyond extraordinary." "Dr. Chun," Eris acknowledged with a nod. "Thank you for coming, for believing enough to investigate." He turned slightly. "This is Lyra and our son, Kale." If the researcher was surprised by Eris's use of the word "our," she hit it well. She inclined her head respectfully toward Lyra and then knelt to be at eye level with Kale, who was regarding the newcomers with solemn curiosity. "Hello, Kale," she said gently. "You are a very special young man, perhaps the most important child in the galaxy right now." Kale, after a moment's hesitation, responded in perfect English. "We made the plants grow. Father says I helped find the secret in the shiny mushrooms." Dr. Chin glanced up at Eris, eyebrows raised in question. "It's a long story," Eris said with a smile. "One of many we have to share. But first, what news of Xenocorp? Do they know we're here?" The researcher stood, her expression turning grave. "They've expanded operations on the far side of the planet. Resource extraction is in full swing. They list you as missing, presumed dead in a storm." She paused. "They've also officially documented the Xylarians as extinct. Their reports to the Interstellar Conservation Authority claim no living specimens were found despite extensive surveys." Lyra's grip tightened on Kale's hand. "A convenient lie," she said softly. "One we're here to disprove," Dr. Chun assured her. "My team represents the Independent Xenobiological Research Collective. We have no corporate affiliations, and what we're seeing here—" She looked around at the restored landscape again. "This changes everything. A supposedly dead world being restored through indigenous and adapted biological processes? An extant native population? This is precisely the kind of discovery that can trigger an emergency conservation ruling, which would halt Xenocorp's operations," Eris concluded, hope rising in his chest. "At minimum, it would force a comprehensive reassessment," Dr. Chen confirmed. "But we'll need documentation. Comprehensive biological samples. Evidence of viable Xylarian population." "A population of one child," Lyra said quietly. "I believe I'm the last adult of my kind." Dr. Chen's expression softened with understanding and determination. "Then Kale is even more precious than I realized. But one surviving child combined with this," she gestured at the restored landscape, "is still enough to trigger protective measures, especially once we reveal Xenocorp's deliberate misrepresentations." The conversation continued as they walked back toward the refuge entrance, the other researchers following at a respectful distance, recording everything with unobtrusive equipment. Eris and Lyra shared the broad outlines of their work, their discoveries in the ancient biorepository, and their vision for expanding the restoration process to other regions. "With proper equipment and additional personnel, we could accelerate the process tenfold," Eris explained, displaying models on his data tablet. "The microbe formulations are self-replicating and adaptable. We've already seen third-generation variants developing naturally to address specific soil conditions." Dr. Chin nodded, her excitement evident. "This goes beyond Xylar," she said. "The applications for other damaged ecosystems throughout the sector are enormous." She turned to Lyra. "Your ancestral knowledge, combined with Dr. Thorne's scientific approach, it's a powerful partnership." Lyra inclined her head in acknowledgement. "We have discovered that wisdom comes in many forms from many worlds. What matters is the purpose to which it is applied." At the refuge entrance, they paused. Dr. Chun sensed the significance of the moment. They were being invited into a sacred space, the last sanctuary of a nearly extinct culture. "We are honored by your trust," she said formally to Lyra. We will respect the knowledge and artifacts we encounter here. Lyra studied the woman and her colleagues for a long moment, then nodded. You have traveled far to help us preserve life. The Ancient Ones would welcome you, as do we. As they descended into the luminous caverns, Kale slipped his hand from Lyra's and ran ahead, eager to show the visitors his home. His voice echoed back to them, excitedly pointing out favorite places and treasures. He straddles two worlds so effortlessly, Dr. Chen observed, watching the child. As we all must learn to do, Eris replied, his arm around Lyra's waist. If there's to be any future worth having. In the heart of the ancient refuge, surrounded by the living heritage of Xyler and the promise of renewal spreading across the surface above, the unlikely family welcomed their first visitors as partners in hope. Hope for a dying world, hope for a nearly extinct species, hope for a future where destruction gave way to healing and isolation to connection. Kale, child of two worlds, danced among the bioluminescent wonders of his underground home, his laughter echoing through chambers that had known only silence for generations. In that sound was the promise of tomorrow, a promise born from the desperate plea of a mother whose milk had dried up and answered by a grieving scientist who had found his way back to life by choosing compassion over protocol, connection over isolation, and love over loss. Outside, green shoots continued to push through red soil, reclaiming Xyler inch by inch, breath by breath, a testament to the resilience of life and the power of those who refuse to merely observe its ending, choosing instead to nurture its rebirth.